Welcome everyone to the third workshop in the series of Constructing Personal Archives 2022. And I'm quite glad that in spite of all of us having so much to do and seems like this winter is very rushed for everyone, we're still making time to engage in such learning experiences and conversations. I really look forward to it every time, as much as this sound sometimes overwhelming with all the ifs and buts of it. I'm Ishita, so most of you know me. I'm not really going to introduce myself. And I'm very happy that Sangamitra and Deepthi have stepped in for the first session in place of Soumya. I'll come to their introductions when they begin. For the first few minutes, we wanted you all to introduce yourselves as well as your project. They have got your project briefs from the first or the second submission of the form. But in this in vocal introduction, you might want to tell us where you are with the project. And we all understand that these projects change. You might have backtracked, you might have been dormant, which is all perfect. So you can almost think of this as a sharing space more than introductions. Sony, since your video is on.
I'm Sony, and I met Ishita last year around this time, and we got talking about everything that she does. And accidentally, I thought, I was saying I know nothing about archiving, I cannot contribute in any way. And that's when I realized, well, everyone has an archive. I was the last person to think of one. But then, I got these books from somewhere, old Sindhi tattered books that, you touch them and they fall apart. They are that bad. So we started talking about that as an archive. I was part of her Kitchen to Kacheri exhibition in March. And from since then, I have kept my interest in the origins of Sindhi literature. My larger project is called The Making of Sindhi Literature as an Indian Literature. Okay, so book history is one part of it. The other is, looking at mining the memories of Sindhi readers. So these 75 years of literature, I don't think, I can read. But I definitely want to go to people and ask them, so what are your 10 best books, or what are the 10 most memorable books that, you would recommend, and how would you talk about them? Why are they important, and all of that? So that's the process I am in. I have been in touch with a couple of writers, and I'm in the process of collecting their oral, testimonies, or whatever stories they have to tell about literature. I have not made sufficient progress here. I'm just trying to network and find people. That's where I am. My project, as I said, is, to give you a little more context. I want to know what this literature is. How did it emerge? What shape did it take? What are the movements, and why is it that we have not heard of a single great Sindhi author? Not forget about great, not even an average author. When we know of, say, Hindi, Marathi, even Gujarati, Malayalam, and Punjabi, Bengali authors at large. So that's my interest. I want to look at readers as archives. So that's my interest. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to Aparna.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So yes, I have been following Ishita's work for a while, and this is for those I haven't yet met, and if there's anyone new here. So we work together at Srishti. So I have a design background. I've been working on an archiving practice for some time now. And these workshops are very important because, they give it a sort of a structure and trajectory, and which I think we all need that little bit of a discipline. Uh, so essentially what I'm interested in is that I run a publishing house called Timbuktu, where I work with young writers, and it's a sort of an author development program. And under that, I have a vertical called Storylines, which is about connecting Gen Z with earlier generations. And a way of doing that is by continuation of family narratives so that they're not forgotten. So it's also a memory project. I work with memory through different lenses, and this is one of them. So Storylines is about continuing family narratives through the generations. And so that is my intent. I'm starting with my own family records because I have a lot of letters, photographs, memorabilia, objects. So I work a lot with material memory as well. Um, so that's what I'm currently doing. So how I want to drive the narrative building, documentation, etc., is through looking at it through different lenses of like people, places, histories, geographies, and lived histories. So it's also like a living histories project because a lot of my forefathers have lived through actual historical events, and which is also for me a way of understanding history better rather than like the classroom history textbook thing that we're all raised on. So that is something I'm trying to encourage with young people to through the Living Histories project. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna. I'm also very thankful that all of you choose to tell how you came to curating for culture. But I don't think that needs to be in the introduction. I like listening to it, but I must. Over to you, Kaustubh.
Um, Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
Good.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, it's my third term workshop here. Like, I'm sharing and learning from all the participants and peers, and also Ishita and uh, invited presenters and all. So, actually, my work deals with family context in a way, like uh, dynamics of everyday family conversations, home, domestic spaces, and emotions of like how home actually bound with emotions of care and safety. But it's not only that. So it's also undercurrents of petty fears, ambitions, like how we conceive it in a family structure. So recently, not like recently, it's my ongoing project in a sense. It's like I'm trying to excavate my close experiences of a joint family, like and joint family in the sense Bengali middle class Hindu Bhadralok family, as I grew up in this kind of family, and it's like my autobiographical journey, as well as it's a collective experience, I feel. So I'm truly trying to archive a few events. So through my paintings and also doing researching with experimental films and bookmaking craft. So in this workshop structure, like I'm here with my bookmaking project. So which is actually I'm conceptualizing as image dictionary. So book of memoir and image dictionary or dictionary of objects, like how we can go through the objects and I mean tell some events through objects, and which I'm actually pasting and attaching in a book format. So yeah, so this my book will orient, intrigue, provoke the reader in some way. Like it's like constructing the uh, privacy in some way. Like it's like a connection between private stories to public.
Okay.
So yeah, it's like just I don't know how it relevant to archival process, but yeah, I'm using archival materials in such way, like old ration cards, photographs, and old maps, dalils. So these are in my work in the book. And yeah, also I'm experimenting with painting formats, like I mean images and stories, etc. And in other hand, my one another project is going on, which is about uh, katha making, which is really related to family stories and I mean the story making of within a family and for close persons, etc. and and working with in a sense craft making. So there is a tradition of sweet making craft in Bengal, which is called mott. In Delhi, it called edri. I don't know if you people know it or not. It's like a sweet figure in small toy kind of figure, which is actually used to sell in times of Diwali and all. So I'm working with that in another project. So it's associated story with family as well as in a sellable object of craft object as craft. So it's like that. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Kaustubh. I think with these first three introduction, Deepti, the diversity sort of which I was telling you is very clear, right? From
Yeah.
absence
Very.
of archives to a plethora of family history to creating archives through art practice. So this
Yeah.
is the diversity with
Yeah.
this group which has been consistently there. Shwetal, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Uh,
Hi.
I'm audible, right?
Yes. You are.
Because otherwise I'll switch off the video. Okay, because
No,
you
you are.
are all a bit shaky. So, okay. So, I have been interested, I am an artist, designer, educator, and I have been interested in culture. And it happened quite accidentally for me, but I was always interested in the history of Navratri in my city of Baroda. And while I was working at a school, I got an opportunity to kind of start digging deeper. And what happened was, at the end of a year and a half of talking to people, recording them, taking down notes, I had enough information to kind of make a film. So that is what I did after that. Uh, but I had a lot more information. The film happened because I knew I had an audience that I wanted to give that information to. That was the school kids and the people around me at that time. But I do have a lot more information with me at this point, and it so happens that every year I keep getting more and more information. I've just become a funnel for a lot of things that keep happening. So at this point, I am interested in certain areas of research, but I'm really scared to get into it because I already have a lot of information that needs organization, and I need to figure out where it's going to go, how people are going to access it. The last two workshops with Ishita have brought a lot of clarity for me as to how I need to move. Hopefully, from this workshop onwards, I'll be doing some work. Ishita has also been working on our family archives. So I kind of draw energy from not only her work, but my cousin who's doing a lot of work. And I realized that, I think at some point, uh, I had to figure out how this information was going to reach people. And I think what is happening over a period of time is I'm realizing these different areas that will reach different people differently. And so yes, I think I'm there. I don't know what else to say. I
This was
had
good
some
enough.
other thoughts, but I think I'm zoning out. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm actually noticing how these introductions are also evolving, not just the projects. I liked how you right now wove your family history and your work as coming together because of these tools and frameworks. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if it's coming together or I'm realizing how different it is, but yeah, I'm kind of connecting to Avni's work with Patni Archives very differently now.
Hmm. Nijam, will you be able to talk to us now?
Yes, Ishita.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the third session for me, and now I collect some of my material from artist DP and Mahbub. So my focus is that how to archive an artist and what points should be included there, and their journey, their earlier life, which is not as a established journey. And I think this metadata mapping section, I think I need to work on their multiple activities on that time in 90s. This is a new thing for me today because I don't know how to create this metadata for an artist archive and what point should be included there. So, okay, so let's see today.
Nijam, do you want to tell Sangamitra, Saman, and Deepthi about the artists a little bit? And of course, the fact that you are based out of Dhaka and the work that you're doing. Just a little bit.
Okay, so I'm from Dhaka, and there is a many trouble for me to join this workshop, and time zone and the payment issue, everything is difficult from here. And I am working on Lipi and Mahbub, and they both founded an organization, Rikto Arts Trust in Bangladesh. And this is a contemporary art platform, and this is the first non-profit art organization in Bangladesh. And they are reaching global point. So my focus is that how they organize themselves in their earlier life together, and how they landed with this organization. So my focus is that their earlier life, what is their journey, and then this is turned to a big to Arts Trust. So that's why I focus on this 90s zone. And so this is the point to focus on Lipi and Mahbub. And
Thank
in
you.
earlier Bangladesh, I think what their journey and what their artwork in this time. This is so first time in Bangladesh on that time in earlier 90s, because we are just born in 1971. So this is a new wave in 90s.
Thank you so much, Nijam. I think thank you for your persistence in spite of all the border issues that we face with making this possible. Thank you.
Thank
Shini,
you.
Yeah, so I am kind of looking at my family archives to be able to document it well, and I inherited a lot of things which I don't have those people to ever understand. So my grandfather, the only way I know about him is with the suitcase I got last time, and I don't have any like, even though he was there for 8 years with me, I actually don't have any memory at all. So, so therefore, it's personal in that sense, that, and it's not like it's an enjoyable thing, because a lot of the stuff in it is very traumatic. It heals a lot of wounds of mine and my grandmother, and I interact with her, and kind of both of us sit and scold him also. So it's kind of very like the person is real in a way, with all the senses of problems and good stuff and everything. So that's one aspect of it. And the other is that I curate a museum and an archive that we are using for our educational work. So we work with 800 schools in about 10 states in India, where we have gender based intersecting with STEM curricula, and we've used a lot of aspects of history and personal archiving, and especially cities archives of that city to be able to be used to design the curriculum. So that's another bit that I professionally use this stuff in. So yeah.
thank you, Shinidhi. Purnima, you have joined us right in time. We were all introducing ourselves, and since you're coming in for the first time, we are heartily welcoming you into the club. I like using that word. I don't know why.
Thank you, Ishita. Thank you. It's lovely. I've been seeing your work through social media, of course, and yes, I've just not had the time to, take some time out for myself to learn something new. So I'm Purnima, and I run something called the Aravani Art Project, which is largely into empowering the transgender community through the arts. And not just that, and I'm very interested in their past, their present, and their future as well. And there's so much of their past that is so unearthed and underdocumented. So there is so much scope, and I'm quite stuck alone with that because I don't have the basic. I mean, I have tried to do as much as I can over the past 6 years, but I feel like it's not enough justice. This has come across as a very nice course for me to understand that and probably channelize how better I can flesh these things out. And I'm really looking forward to learn some of those skills and the nitty-gritty of doing this, the importance of doing it, because sometimes people are so ignorant about how important it is to archive the past for a future. I think that part people are very disconnected with. And I'm really, really interested in that aspect. As much as I run Naravani commercially, there's this aspect of me that I love to dig the past and know why they did certain things the way they did. And it was right under our noses, and we have been ignoring it. So that's a very interesting part. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you so much. I think the appreciation for the work you are doing is, I think, we're quite mutual. So thanks for joining us. And I hope that we'll be able to speak more about this, and we can build more such uh, I think workshops, for the lack of any other word, for the community as well, so that there is more work happening, unearthing, as you rightly said, and we get to read about it.
Absolutely. I think they need to also understand that their knowledge is important. They've never felt that way.
Yes.
Yeah, that has been a nice, interesting challenge as well, because whenever I used to ask them stories and be ready to record, and they used to be like, "Why are you recording in such a boring story?" And I know. So yes, they should also understand that their knowledge is very valuable as much as everybody else's. Yes.
Right. So, for the interest of Purnima, I'm going to quickly recap what has happened in the first two workshops. So, Purnima, this has been a series in its own ways, as much as we have also kept it open as a gateway for people to join and leave. Over the 6 months, the intention is to incubate different kind of archiving projects and enable them in their own journeys. And in the first workshop, hence, we focused on intent building and project building exercises, because as you rightly said, a lot of us don't have answers to why are we doing it. Even sometimes not just the community whom we are interacting with, but we ourselves as archivists, we are curators, we might be excited. So at that intent building stage, we spoke about larger different kinds of archiving projects, how they are useful, what happens, and of course what goes behind it, because it's a commitment, tougher commitment to make, because these are not necessarily highly funded or paying projects. In the second workshop, we moved on to talking about collecting archives, where I think the proposals had become more refined and perhaps scoped down what we can achieve in 6 months. And we spoke to participants about different ways that you can go looking for archives, because otherwise it's just lying next to us, but we don't know that this has an archival value. Or there are memories which are, or objects that are missing, and memories might need to be recreated in the form of interviews or oral histories. Or we had our presenters who talked about documentation from the scratch, where you start documenting buildings and making drawings and plans and so on and so forth. And they also become testimonies of the stories that we want to tell. So these are largely the two areas that we have covered. And hence, where we are moving today is if we have the material. So those who have, we have requested them to bring the material, but those who didn't yet have material, you could engage in a speculative exercise, or you could have used Google reference images. But the idea is now, if you have a bunch of archives, what do you do with it? Where do you start, right? I think the most scary step. How do you structure it? What is the right lens? What are the ways? And hence, how will you map the metadata? And this whole idea of metadata comes from the fact that that is what primarily makes any archive searchable or usable. This is always to imagine that your archives will grow and there will be thousands of objects, and that time one would want to filter and search instead of getting lost in a few known pieces, right? This also addresses issues of, again, representation, or again, inclusivity in terms of different ways of looking at materials and histories, so that we're not stuck by the standards which are preset mostly by the Western practitioners. So that's where we are for mapping metadata. And I think what collectively our interest over the two sessions and the presenters will be is to engage in exercises, but also show you sources, but also to say that this is as much a creative process as the other parts of archive building. And while this looks scary, it doesn't need to be. We hope that that message comes across by the end of the day. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our first set of facilitators, Deepthi and Sangamitra. And since they have stepped in, their introduction is way more important to be done on the call. Thank you again. Deepthi and Sangamitra, the duo, has founded Past Perfect Heritage Management in April 2016 with the intention of taking the art of archiving and research to a larger audience and using it in a manner that helps preserve and promote an inherited legacy and heritage, thereby making it relevant for future generations. With the team of enthusiastic archivists, researchers, oral historians, and curators, Past Perfect operates across three core verticals, which includes documentation and archiving, historical research and analysis, and curation. And these three often intertwine, as we all would expect, especially in projects where the company is guiding and helping a custodian build their collection, preserve it, and harness it for the benefit of a larger audience. Since its inception, Past Perfect has worked on projects ranging from setting up and managing institutional, corporate, and family archives, designing engagement campaigns for existing archives, providing archival research to media houses for historically inspired feature films and web series, and bringing archival material alive in the form of exhibitions, centenary campaigns, museums, coffee table books, and more. So we have a very experienced duo with us, and we are looking forward to what you have for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Ishita, for the introduction.
Yes.
So I think it's really heartening to see that I think everyone's sort of taking personal projects that inspire them and creating it into something that, for the future can be accessible. I think we've all been at that point where we've seen, and most of our projects as well, where we've seen clients who have an end goal. And I think with all of y'all, that sort of also came through that I think first there is an end goal that you all have in your mind with regards to this material. And I think then you somewhere backtrack and realize that, oh, there's more material than what will go into the curated product. And, it's great for this material then to take its own shape and form and become accessible to, again, be interpreted in various ways, I think, like Ishita has said. And I mean, also open it up to people who can look at it in with different perspectives, do creative things with it, etc. So I think it's a great start. If you have an end goal, of course, you're motivated enough to see through it. Otherwise, we've also seen cases where you sort of start with a lot of enthusiasm, you have a lot of material, you get overwhelmed, and then sort of also just sit on the material and it doesn't go anywhere. Because like she said, I think accessioning, cataloging, metadata mapping is in a way also a lot of scientific sort of data mapping, and it can get monotonous at various points, and people do look at it as an activity that can be never ending. But at the end of the day, I think if you're clear about the purpose and the way you would like for it to be accessed, retrieved, and for yourself as well as the others, I think it makes the whole journey much more engaging. I think Sangamitra, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks. But you've anyway sort of segued into what I wanted to come in with. So just to take a step back, what you need to understand is that in Past Perfect, although we started out with a background of institutional archiving, we quickly realized that those are not the trappings we can restrict ourselves to, because there are all kinds of people who want to engage in their history, and they have all kinds of a varied set of factors that define their purpose. And which is why what Dipti was saying, that you need to know the purpose of what you're doing, right? In an institutional archive, the purpose is very, very different. It is for posterity. It is for a faceless reader, a faceless researcher in the future. You're making your collection accessible, and you have the bandwidth and infrastructure and the funding to be able to make every photograph, a tiny 2x2 photograph available to a researcher from a large collection of 2 lakh objects. On the other hand, the projects that you guys are all starting out with, or in the process of incubating, they are very different projects. While I know you are discovering your purpose along the way, at this stage you need to sort of put in place the columns that will support a project like this, the columns that will give life to this project. So even beyond you, the material that you collect, the information that you gather still has relevance, and which is why it's not just, in your case, you will have realized by now, it's not just about the actual tactile material that you are dealing with, but it's also the stories around it that need to be intertwined, and therefore your documentation and archiving will become very different from what an institution does. At this point, you're doing it alone, but if say 10-20 years later, and when you're archiving, you must always have that long-term view, that if someone is to come into this 15 years later, 20 years later, when you're not there, they should not have to reinvent the wheel. They should not have to go through that process. And that's what, as archivists, as documenters, we must ensure. We will just help you in trying to figure out what metadata works from you. And everything has to come, because of the size of the project, everything has to come from your own experience, with a little bit of projection of how this can be relevant later. It has to be a combination of these two things. So don't go by what ICOM suggests. Don't go by what international archiving societies suggest in terms of metadata and things like that. Your metadata is going to come from your own experience and your own community's trajectory. That is what is, there are certain technical elements that need to be built in, but everything else will come through that experience, through that journey.
Yeah. Correct. So I think taking it from there, like she said, there's of course, I mean, it's a combination of a lot of things. And I think whenever we develop metadata fields for any collection, and we've worked with, I think, and that's where I was telling Ishita, where do we begin? Because at the end of the day, we've worked with oral history collections, we've worked with books, artworks, maps, digital collections, etc. And all of them have a different way of, at the end of the day, you have to look at the collection differently because it is a different type of collection. So I'm just going to also just share my screen with a few questions that I have put on. Yeah, so I think there were certain things that, I wanted you all to sort of also answer if possible with respect to your collections. I think once you all have started gathering stuff, I think you all have all given a brief about what your projects are and what would you like to do with it. I think Ishita also mentioned that some of y'all do have collections in place. So I think if y'all can at this moment come in and talk about what are the collections that y'all have been able to build so far, in terms of material types and media types, because that sort of also defines how you can construct your catalog at the end of the day. So any of y'all who can sort of give me an insight on what are the collections you all have so far?
Yeah, so I have oral history, so a lot of interviews that I have. Then I have music, a lot of music, and which is also part of the oral history, but I also have music which has been recorded just as music. So there are people who are singing on their own, which is part of the oral history. But I also have music which is like recorded music, sometimes in studios, sometimes while people are performing. That is there. Then I have images, images which are of people doing Garba, also of places of relevance, of objects of relevance. And they kind of tie in with a lot of oral history. They also tie in with the songs and the music. I also have photographs of so these are there are objects which are related to music and to the dance and all that, but then there are also images of things which are connected to Navratri on the religious side of it and also on the social side of it. So I mean, images come into many different categories, which I kind of need to figure out where it's
How and where.
go. And I also have physical objects, which I'm now getting more interested in. So, I mean, I'm
See,
keeping
that's
an
very
eye out for that. I'm not collecting it. So, yeah, that is where I am.
okay. That's great. Anybody else who can come in who say has a different, yeah, Aparna?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
So I have a lot of old photographs because my great grandfather had a tripod, and he was also a keen photographer. So many of them are really old, and I'm very interested in studying like the studio system of the day. What I understand there were not many cameras those days, but that's also I've added to my study of family narratives is the practice of going to studios. And I find that like the women are dressed up, and I'm very fascinated by the sets in those old studios. So even little things like who stands and who sits and who owned those studios. So I want to next in my next phase, I want to start a recce of those studios.
Hmm.
Some of them are still there, and or I'm trying to find out the descendants of the owners, for
Oh,
instance, even if the studios have shut
the
short.
studio owners. Yeah.
So like Born and Shepherd, for instance, was a name that was
Yeah.
stamped behind one of the old photos. So I want to like find that out and try and go and meet them. That's one. The other thing which I did, yeah, so then I also have a lot of old letters because a lot of my forefathers were in the services. So some of them go back to like turn of the century, 1904, when, for instance, he got his first posting in Lahore, and he was told that he has to join the PWD, the Public Works Department. It's the time of the Raj, and how he has to learn Urdu.
Hmm.
So things like that, which talk about a new position, and then a new. I have like pictures that are set in Lahore. So I'm fascinated by the jewelry that the local people wore, and so what it meant to be a South Indian living in Lahore. And there was a big South Indian community, like all the people who worked in the services.
Yeah.
So what does it mean culturally in terms of lifestyle, jewelry, clothing? Like there's so many lenses through which we can study this. So that is something I really want to do also, other than just preserving the narratives for Gen Z, which started out as my primary intention. So the other thing which I recently started about 1 or 2 months ago is that, for instance, I went with my father, who's elderly now, through a recce of old Madras, and he showed me like what stood in certain, say, heritage areas, like say Mambalam, what stood there during his childhood. So I took pictures of how it looks now. So say there may be an establishment or some house or something, but next to that, I want to show, like, use juxtaposition as a tool, where I want to maybe show via illustration what was there.
Hmm.
That is something I'm trying to figure out how to do well, and show in an interesting way.
Yeah.
For instance, there was a World War trench in his house that was built by during the war, and his grandfather was apparently an air warden who went by. His task was to go on bicycle and tell everyone to switch off the lights. So there would be a sort of a siren coming in and stuff.
Hmm.
And Japanese warplanes would be in the sky then. So that was the time. But now, of course, it's a block of apartments. But I want to show via illustration, for instance, where the trench was. Now, given memory and time and change of structure, I also understand there are certain things that may have changed. Some memories may not be completely accurate. So I want to factor those in also. So
Correct.
what I mean is I have part archives, which are actually, objects and tactile, and some are memories, which I will juxtapose in some.
With them. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Correct. So I think even with, the two of y'all coming through with what your material is vis-a-vis how you look at it, I think that also sort of just substantiates what I've written in my first line, which is, of course, there are certain standards that your catalog will have to have, because that's just hygiene. But I think to tailor your metadata is how you need to figure it out, because I think as we've also gone by, we've seen that we have interpreted and people have interpreted our collections differently, and then we've added metadata constantly. So even though you may be creating one kind of a catalog today, there is no harm in going back, adding a column, because I think at the end of the day, for example, in institutional projects, sometimes our end goal for this catalog is to convert it into a retrievable software, right? If there are the funds to do it, we do build a CMS. Now, the thing is, the moment CMS comes into the picture, it actually works really well for your backend thinking. And I think which is why if you guys at the end of the day can think of this as a software, you'll automatically start building your catalog very differently, because you realize that, oh, I'm on a website, I have seen the photo that I have collected.
And let me just come in. When you think of a software, don't think of anything fancy. Just think of all your shopping sites.
Yeah.
Okay, when you are shopping and filtering and looking for tops and jewelry and how is it that you are, reaching a particular item of interest? So just think of it like that. Think of it use that interface only to think of it. That's the easiest way to structure your collection.
Because I think there's, of course, the tags that you assign to a particular photograph, which is, like I said, hygiene. But there are filters which help you reach that. And I think a lot of this that you are talking about, of course, memories in your case, Aparna, becomes, I think, a column of its own, because you have attached memories to a lot of these objects. So it does definitely become a metadata of its own, because you'd like to connect the two. Right? And if, for example, it's a recorded memory where it's an oral history, because it's a different type of collection, and I'll take you through that as well. What we use, and it's something that's an ideal archivist's tool, is something that we call associated records or cross-reference, right? It's most of the archives we know do not end up associating every record that they have with something else in their archive. But it is the ideal way of going about it. And I think if you have a small collection, it is easy to do that. So for example, if you have an oral history, sort of a memory that someone has shared with you through an oral history recording, it will go into your oral history collection. But you have a photograph that connects to that collection. You marry the two items through this field called cross-reference or associated records. Right? Because at the end of the day, when, say, tomorrow you are looking in your catalog, you're looking at this photograph, you're like, oh, someone's told me about this. So it's literally about starting off from one item. Your archive is, at the end of the day, a web. You start off from one item, but it should help you connect to everything else in your archive in one way or the other. Right? I think that's something that, so while you are building it, constantly be conscious of how you are making the connections in your archive as well. I think it's very important to not just, you are, of course, treating an object independently as well, where you define everything just pertaining to that object, but don't forget that it's also part of a larger collection. And those connections constantly need to be made. And a linking sort of needs to be needs to happen. Yes.
And because you guys are building your own collections and doing the research, you're in the best position to make these connections, which is vital. And that is what you hand over to the next generation, if and when there is one. Right. So that's why you need to be alert. And in terms of the associated records and cross-referencing that Dipti spoke, it is, again, it becomes in larger archive, it's a huge toll on bandwidth and the team's efforts, and which is why it doesn't get maintained, even though we've tried to do this in several corporate archives and institutional archives, simply because the next generation of archivists or new recruits will come in and they don't have that understanding of the previous collection, the provenance history, how things developed, how the collection came into being. They don't have that understanding, and so they cannot do that cross-referencing. But all of you guys are in that wonderful position where you can do it, and you should be sort of building it into your database.
Yeah. And I think whenever, for example, now let's take a particular item in your collection, right? I think when you pick up an item, the metadata that, and I'm going to show you some samples that we've done for, say, institutes and other collections. But when you sort of pick up an object and your first catalog is going to be a rudimentary Excel sheet, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to look at that object from two perspectives primarily. You're going to look at it from the point of view of the content that it's giving you, and also physically. what happens, and of course, and which is why no metadata is going to apply to all your collections. The same metadata. You are going to have to change it as and when your collection evolves, your collection changes. Example, you picked up a photograph and you want to sort of record everything from who is in it to whether it is black and white or color or not. And the reason I'm saying that you also need to record the technical specifications at the end of the day is when your collection grows, when your archive becomes older. And that's what I've said in my last line. It's not just necessarily for retrieving a collection for another user, but also for back-end upkeep, right? I think it's a collection that constantly needs to be audited. So the technical specifications of your objects help you sort of audit your archive constantly, whether or not it is digitized or not. Needs to be recorded in a catalog, because when you cross say even 500 items, you are not going to remember which one was a black and white photo, which one was a digitized, which one has been digitized or not, which photo is very fragile. Tomorrow, say you do have some budget and you'd like to conserve this photograph. You can literally just use your Excel sheet to filter out your fragile items and give that in for conservation. So also, and sorry, I'll go into the next slide. Yeah. Okay, and I'll show you this now in with regards to catalogs. So let me take you through the institutional archive methodology. In institutional archives, the way we sort of, our primary method of segregation is media type, also because we are working with physical material. Now, when there's physical material, it is stored in a certain manner back in the archive. Ideally, you cannot keep a photograph, a paper record, an object together, because they're different material types, right? So, which is why our primary method of segregation is by the type of media, and which is why we develop accession numbers, which is basically the unique identity number you assign to an item. Why an accession number? I know it makes it slightly complicated. People, and a lot of clients have told us this also as to, oh my gosh, we'll have to find the item by so and so PH 0101, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, your accession number is the only unique attribute of your item, because two titles can be similar, everything else can be similar, but your accession number can never be similar, right? So it's the quickest way of retrieving your item backend. What we've started doing for the ease of retrieval in the digital space, that is once you've digitized your records, is we do definitely put in the accession number and put a title after an underscore so that you can also search by word, right? So those are things that you can develop as and when you also, it's a lot of trial and error at the end of the day, right? You sort of look at it, they're like, oh, I'm not getting this item when I search for this. It's not happening. I need to add one more column. I need to rename it differently. So all of these decisions start sort of, getting formed. So I'll just now, let me try if I can share. Yeah, I'll just zoom in a little bit. So, for example, when we were developing the metadata system for the Citizens Archive of India, which is primarily an oral history and material memory archive. Now, the Citizens Archive of India essentially records oral histories with everyone born before 1947. That's their Generation 1947 project. But they hope to incubate a lot more projects, oral history specific projects. And they have material memory as well, which they collect from their interviewees. Now, these material memory again can be in the form of two things. It can either be actual photographs, but they try and avoid that as far as possible because they are not a physical archive. They've restrained themselves to just being a digital archive. So they digitize the material that the interviewees have and get only digital assets into their archive. So for them, once we sort of understood what are these collections that they're constantly sort of getting in and what is the purpose, who's going to access it, we designed like the catalog for them. Now, primarily what we figured out was that your catalog will have to have four necessary things. You will have identity elements, which is literally everything that's basic to your item, right? You'll have everything like the name of interviewee, name of interviewer, date of interview, the basic details. With regards to a photograph, it will be original title of the photograph, whether or not the period of the photograph and all of that. So those are the identity elements of that particular object. Then you go into finding aids, which is how would you like to find this object, right? And that's again ever evolving, and I'll show you how also, because in the Bajaj archive and the Kirloskar archive that we've set up, these are the fields that we have constantly changed and evolved around. So I'll come back to finding aids with a different example. And then you have technical details. That's if you have an audio file, you'll put in the format, the duration, the size, and the device details. The reason why all of this is important is because technology is today, yes, very sort of but tomorrow redundant, right? It can get obsolete at any point in time. So you need to know the original format of your file, the original device that was recorded on, so that tomorrow, if you need to convert this and sort of, bring it back to the newer form of the digital file that has come. I think it's simply like CDs or cassettes, etc. Today we are having to digitize them into digital files that can be on the computer. Tomorrow it will be something else. So recording the original properties, especially of a digital file, becomes supremely important. And then we of course have location paths, which again applies to your digital archive as well as this thing. And then you have archival processes, which is essentially when you have a team, this is more applicable where you're keeping a track of all the processes that an archive needs to maintain as hygiene, right? So, okay, 1 second. Now I'll just go back to the PPT.
Would you be able to share this a little later? I was noting down the last table. Okay, fine.
Yes, I'll certainly share that. Yeah. So like I said, the 4 broad categories, we have identity, finding elements, technical specifications, and archival process tracker. Now, why an accession number, I've already told you all. A lot of people are very hesitant in recording provenance, and that's something we've noticed, right? They don't maintain provenance as much as they should. And I mean, that's something that we've always, because we've had the struggle of coming into a collection of which there was no provenance recorded, nothing recorded, and we don't know who to go back to for details. We don't know the credibility of the object. So recording something like this is supremely important, considering you guys are going to other people and collecting your material also, right? I think it's supremely important to record who the material has come from and when.
And also, in a lot of cases, you will have a provenance history. So you go to someone who has the material, but that someone has also got it from somewhere else. And that will take you to the exact story behind the creation of the record. So which is why your provenance history also needs to be recorded. And another thing, and completely from layman terms, let me tell you something. You will, when your collection is when you have a sizable collection, you're not going to remember things by the accession number. You're not going to remember things by the title of the record. You're going to remember things by, जब इनके घर गए थे, इन्होंने दिया था, उसमें कुछ ऐसा था. So you very often remember things like that. So you should also be conscious of how how you have sort of acquainted yourself with an item. So that is where you put down that is where the provenance field becomes supremely important.
Yeah. And I think just adding to what she said, that whole thing of the provenance history that is with them. And I think that applies to all of your projects, I think, in a very, very large manner, because at the end of the day, you all are also trying to trace the origin story of a lot of these things and sort of, trace the journey back. So the moment I think in conversations, you all have documented something like this, it is great to put it down before it is lost.
And it adds to the authenticity of the material.
For sure. Yeah.
Right. If you get an artwork, if you get a sketch from someone and you are able to trace its provenance history, you do know, and if it's a believable story, if it's verified and things like that, you do know that this is an authentic artwork from the period and not someone's recreation later and things like that. So for the sake of authenticity, credibility of borrowed material or loaned material, again, the provenance history becomes very, very important.
Yeah. Yes, Shriyati?
Yeah, like a lot of material that I have sourced are acquisitions, because we have sourced them from lots of kabadiwalas and lots, I have a network of like some 100
How to?
kabadi walas of the country who just tell me, sir, आपको ये इसका use होगा क्या, and then send it to me.
Hmm.
And so now I do provenance in terms of that guy, but usually it will be like items that are personal belongings to some family which has just discarded it. So I'm very careful that nothing, like, let's say it's somebody's photograph collection or something, right? So I'm not going to digitize and put it up. So I'm careful about how I use it, but I still don't have that family. So, and also it's not about their family because I know nothing about their family. So it's not, unlike my own project, it's not about a family's history, but it's mostly about materials used and photographic development. We use it in a largely STEM context of histories of cameras and histories of, lots of things.
Yeah.
So how does provenance feature in there? And also another thing is, sometimes you do get objects that could be of historic relevance, and then I'm like, some important family has thrown it. Like, I got a collection of amazing 8 mm reel of one of the world's first solar scientists. And now I'm like sitting on a very important piece, and I could write to them and ask about it and so on. But also, I want to establish my provenance record properly. As long as my vendor, he told me the whole story of how he got it and who sold it, and I have the transcripts of my conversations with him. Is that enough to show it, or like, I'm just a little confused because my sources are very unique. So yeah,
Yeah, that's
I
tricky.
think
Your
and
while
I've paid
entire
money.
question, could you
So,
also
and I've got
start with, sorry, go ahead, Srinidhi, finish it, sorry.
and I've also paid money, so it is an acquisition. So I just want you to shed light on that. And I have got my receipts and Google Pay transcripts and all of those also. And many of them have written letters telling I
so
have
that
given it.
clarifies, that keeps you in the clear,
Yeah.
because you have that your point of purchase. At that point of purchase, it's authentic. It's you can trace it. You can trace source of money. You can trace source of acquisition. All of that is fine. But yes, what you're dealing with is very tricky,
It's an unorganized.
and with art collectors and and collections based on purely collectibles, yes, you're getting into a completely different realm over here. And this is where verification and authentication of the material through multiple sources coming.
Yeah. I think that bit
And
about,
flea markets will never have that.
yeah, I think it's great to have the story that you have already. But that whole thing that you spoke about of doing some more historical research on the object, because you have the provenance of how it came to that guy and then you. But I think the original provenance, tracing that original provenance journey will also be important to establish the authenticity bit. Right now, what you have is you have the object and you are, like she said, in clear of keeping it and having it in your collection. But I think uh, it'll be important for you to get into that historical research to build the provenance further.
Sure, thank you. Yeah.
And you'll have to do that in consultation with experts. Show the object to various people, get the dating right, get the materiality of it right, study the material history of an object to authenticate whether it could be of that of the claimed time period and things like that. So with a collection like this, like I said, you'll need dedicated time, effort, manpower to just make sure that that what you have in your collection is verified, authentic. And again, it brings in a lot of legality. Maybe at this stage you're not worried about these things, but it brings in all of that. And we've seen that with lots of collections. We've seen that with rare book collections that people have. There's no way you can trace it, whether it's a first edition rare collection or what. It becomes tricky there. But like I'm saying, that scope, a discussion around that is for another day, perhaps.
So I was going to sort of request at this point to presume that, let's say, we don't know what is provenance. I thought that I mean, because yes, you are using it quite consciously, knowing that most of us know. But
Yeah.
if you wanted to sort of simplify it for all of us to understand, what do you mean by provenance? And second question which comes to my mind is, of course, how do you deal with the ephemeral when it comes to provenance?
Yeah.
Because when it's hardcore objects, yes, all these steps make sense, but there is so much that's ephemeral in terms of information that we find. Nobody's ever going to know who is the real author, so or who where it even originated. So in that situation, how do you go about it?
So I think in like simplified terms, provenance is literally I mean, yeah, it is how, what, where, and I mean, it's literally it answers every question about your object, like how it came to you, and who gave it to you, and when did they give it to you. It is literally tracing the history of how it is in your collection today. That would be, I think, does that simplify it, Ishita? Do you think? Yeah, okay. And in terms of, I think your second question, I don't know, Sangamitra, do you want to come in on how, as far as my opinion would be, I think it would also be it's as much as you can find out. At the end of the day, we have built a lot of catalogs where it is that it came to us through this point, and that is where the provenance history ends, right? Because we don't know what happened before that, etc., etc. That is a missing link. But what we've also seen is that it gets built eventually when, say, another person may come to you and say, "Oh, I know a little more about this, and this is what the origin is." So it's not something. So today you may just record how it came to you and when it came to you and who gave it to you, but it can be an evolving sort of history as well. It's not something you need to put down uh, just today, right? I think it's fine if that grows eventually. Tomorrow you may get to know more about it, and somebody else in an oral history interview, you bring up the object, will be able to tell you a little more as to, oh, I remember seeing this here, or I remember hearing about this. You can add that as a note. Again, I think the authenticity of that information, etc., can be sort of, you can dilly-dally over it, but I think it's good to treat it as an additional piece of information that adds a layer to your object. I think it's just great to.
Yeah, I
So
think the
why?
reason for both the questions was that one, for us to understand that it will always
Yeah,
be evolving. It won't
correct.
be that we'll have all the 100% information and only then we can start, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that applies to your whole catalog. I
yeah.
think,
It
yeah,
does.
except the
It does
original
because
title of your
as
item.
you go from object to object, as you go, as the years go by in your project, your understanding of the history of your community or whatever the subset is evolving, and it is important, in the cataloging process to go back and build that into. It is, go back into the system and rebuild it again. It is, I get it. It can be a bother because it's an added layer of the job that you have to do, but at the same time, it's essential, like I said, for the long term use of the material that you are gathering. So therefore, if you are dealing with collections, in terms of your own personal skill set, you have to be obsessive about order and organization, and B, then you have to be meticulous about making sure that you go back and refine an entry, and that keeps happening. That understanding needs to be built in, and it's just that you have to process it and you'll have to start functioning in a certain way. When you're a researcher, your mind is functioning differently. When you're an archivist and you're cataloging, your mind is functioning completely differently. And we've realized that
Yeah.
within our teams, we because they say it's a matter of how you're wired. So that needs to, and since you guys are doing this on your own and alone, you need to train yourselves and be alert of this process. Going back to Ishita's original question, yes, in terms of to make work foolproof and simplistic, uh, along with metadata metadata field headings, we do try and standardize the data entry process by having a formulaic version of what you're going to enter, so that anybody, even if you get an intern for a month, a young college student can come in and just put in things in a certain order. Again, you need that order because you should be able to search later. And I'm sure Dipti will go into the fields, I don't know, but take for instance something like the date column. All right, how you build in the date into your field is important. Are you doing DD, YY? Are you putting in the month or the decade? All of that is important because at the end of the day, you may remember something to be from the 80s, but you've put down the date in a way that the 80s does not come up, right, in your search. So we do put in formula for each of our metadata field, or by now we know the different types of material that comes in. So we have a set of glossary phrases for each metadata field. But having said that, sometimes, especially with art objects, whether it's paintings, whether it's sculptures, whether it's coins and things like that, you will have to put in a paragraph of on the provenance history. It makes your catalog a little you have to deviate from standard, but that may become essential to put down, simply because that's also a journey you need to capture. So you do have a provenance, so which means in some cases what we've been able to do is we've developed a field called immediate provenance, where you put down where the present custodian has got the material from, and there is a provenance note as well, where if there is a history to the custodianship of a material, that can also be put down, even if you don't have the hard facts of kab kya kharida tha, kitne ne kharida tha, kahan se aaya tha. You can at least build in what is known. So there are ways you can, which is why we keep saying that don't follow standards that are available internationally. Follow your gut. If you think it needs to be built in, create a separate column for it and build it in. If you don't have that information for every record, put down NA. It's fine, but at least have a dedicated space for the information that's coming.
Yeah, and that I think that's exactly what I was going to say. That I think in the beginning, when you're looking at your collection, you look at it from today's definition of looking at it holistically. Your definition of holistic only may change eventually. But I think as far as today is concerned, this is how I'm viewing my collection. You put down all the fields that you think are important for your retrieval. You may not necessarily fill all of them today, right? But when you are creating your fields, and which is why a lot of times we have about 25 columns on an Excel sheet, we are not all columns may necessarily apply to all material, because some may have, like she said, a provenance history, some may not. But build it in, because wherever it is applicable, it will come through. So it may be that a few of your cells are blank on an Excel sheet, but that's not a problem as long as it's sort of, I think, giving for that time, at least giving you a holistic perspective of this. This is what all my collection can lend itself to. So, yeah, Aparna, you raised your hand. So.
Yeah, just a very quick question over here, if I may, is that, so I also have stamps and coins. So I wanted to know if you have any visual references of the cataloging that you've been speaking about. So I'm also planning a digital archive, like on a blog, but since these are all in actual form, it would be great to see. So then I can, make a sort of a visual connect to the suggestions that you and Shanghamitra are making. That would be interesting. The second thing is the legalese. Is it important, for instance, to have on notarized stamp paper how you came to be the owner of this, especially if it's something that you've inherited? Because people can stake a claim, or it could even attract, say, government authorities who are very hawkish about archaeological and vintage things. That's what I wanted to ask.
It is excellent to have that. The last bit, and it does come into, especially I think inherited and acquired collections, we do have a different set of columns for that. Acquisitions may be also put in the invoice value, the invoice number, and the legal documentation associated with the transfer of the record. So I think for an inherited one, also it will be great to have that, because it is required for legal purposes as well as just authenticating that it is yours. Because we know, and I think everyone knows of a lot of people who've acquired things, just randomly and may claim, So I think it's great to just have that as well. We've seen that in a lot of cases where there is no paperwork supporting a lot of the collectors' collections. And that does put them in a position, because again, if you look at it really from a long-term perspective, today you are preserving it. Tomorrow, say anybody who inherits it from you may want to sell it, and then if the paperwork doesn't exist, they will be able to get the right value. If you also want to look at it from that perspective. But today, yes, you are. So, Sangeeta, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, basically that's it. What is it? What is the purpose of your collection? All right, especially in these cases, not your letters and photographs and house drawings. I'm talking about specifically coins, sculpture, anything that say the government of India recognizes as of national importance, potentially. In only in those cases, it helps to get it authenticated, and you have that certificate of authentication if you're getting it from a source like that. Again, going back to the previous question, if you're getting it from the flea market, you're never going to get it. You're never going to get an invoice also. They'll give you a parcha.
Yeah.
At most, right? That's the informal way in which that that marketplace works. There's nothing you can do about it. So
Because
yes, it does help.
Like 4 generations, I mean, we've met generations where they just think it has come to them, but they are not able to prove it at the end of the day for their own purpose. They don't need to prove it to anybody else, but I think for themselves, they're like, we think it came from here like this, like. So just to keep that going, I think it's an addition to say what Ishita asked or Srinidhi asked. I think the provenance history gets lost if you don't maintain that documentation. So the next generation will not have the documentation to build the provenance history in the first place, and they will be at you gave it to them, and they won't know anything beyond that. So I think the continuity of that is something you can maintain for at least when you're going to transfer the collection next, is how you leave your catalog and your documentation person. That, okay, I'm giving everything which has detailed documentation as well as my interpretations that are attached to it, because you are making connections today. Again, somebody else may not. So you are attaching everything that you associate with your collection to the way you are documenting it and leaving it for, like you said, whether it's Gen Z or an external user as well.
And sort of, even if it is not from the purpose of selling it in the future and things like that, even from the question of your ownership of the material, you have to understand something, that the moment if it is an item of national importance, then government authorities have the right to come and
take
it away from you, negotiate with you and things like that. So even if you are the rightful owner of something, because it is deemed as whether you have Tipu Sultan's coin or something like that, if
thing that puts it into public domain after a point, right? I think just anybody can come and say now it's for the public.
So fortunately for us, private collections, especially paper records and all, don't fall into it. So most archivists are in the clear, but objects such as these become tricky, and there is a clear-cut policy as to what is to be done with government records and government-owned material when it comes into the public domain and things like that. So yes, we have a little more leeway at this stage as private collectors. But then again, if you happen to come into the radar of any cultural, government cultural body or whatever, that's a battle you'll have to fight. And there, I suppose, and we're going off topic completely, you'll have to reconsider as to whether it makes sense for you to hold on to it and make it and keep it as part of your your private community's collection, or handing it over to a larger institution with a wider network will do justice to the material. That's a call you'll have to take, weigh out sentimentality versus usability, access, research. At the end of the day, government institutions have that infrastructure which can take an object and showcase that object appropriately.
Because we have come across a lot of individuals say who said that, I don't know what will happen after, so I'd like to transfer to a government body. And then we sort of catalog their whole collection in order for it to then merge into a government institution. Of course, at that point in time, we also took into consideration what confidential records would be, because I think when you're making such transfers, you also then at the end of the day can govern through your catalog what is it that you'd like users to access. There's some things that you may not want them to access but would like to keep for posterity within your private collection, so that becomes a private, cannot be accessible to everyone type thing. Yeah, I think we. And regarding the samples, we'll of course show you some, but I think you also mentioned that you'd like to have a digital archive online, and then there's of course, so there'll definitely be a difference with what you showcase digitally vis-a-vis what you maintain backend. And that's something that we were actually working for a collection on yesterday itself, because backend, of course, you have a plethora that you will need to maintain. Digitally, you will only sort of put up what's required for showcase. So I think at the end of the day, you select your showcase columns vis-a-vis backend maintenance and record documentation columns. So there'll be that difference. We'll show you what backend looks like, and then you can sort of filter and put whatever you think makes sense onto your digital bit.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. That'll be very helpful. Also, the materials for, say, for stamps would be different, coins would be different.
Right. Yeah.
And even the labels, if there's an existing format itself that can be bought somewhere, or do we need to put it together? All that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I think let me go back.
Did not imagine Provenance field would take us in so many directions. But I think we'll just go back to the script right now.
Because we are now retracking the conversation, could I suggest that we take a 10-minute break? I'm just because it's been 1.5 hours and this was very heavy.
Yeah.
This would be a good time for everyone to just take a little breather and come back.
Perfect. Yeah.
That okay? So let's all reconvene in 10 minutes exactly, 11:40, with our teas, coffees, bio break, whichever feels comfortable. And then we'll go on non-stop till 1. That sounds great. Thank you, Deepthi. All right. I hope everyone's back or almost joining us in a bit. And I hope that break was helpful in some way. I think I also wanted to reply to Srinidhi's, here you are, Srinidhi. I was going to say that, yes, I completely agreed. I think this conversation, Sangamitra, went so much into provenance, perhaps because everybody's wearing so many different hats. If you're just thinking, I don't mean it in any other way, but just as an trained archivist, where you're just following through perhaps the task that you have been given. Perhaps it would have meant differently when you go through a training. But when you think through these different hats where it belongs to you or your family. So Beena, who's not joined us, but was with us in the last workshop, she's actually dealing with legal issues as she continues to want to work with the materials. So I think in those scenarios, these questions of provenance become very real, which I don't think, if I'm right, let's say an archive or institution might experience once the material is handed over, because the deed is done.
Yeah.
You don't then go and ask where the person who gave the material, oh, did they really have the rights?
Yeah.
So that's very interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we've realized this in especially small projects where we are doing we are taking care of someone's collection, someone's art collection and things like that. Not the family history projects, but yes, we've had to deal with similar situations. I'm really sorry. There's some civil work happening at home and all kinds of noises you'll be able to hear. But we've also, figured this out. And like, that's why I said that while we started out doing institutional, archiving and histories, it's a completely different. I mean, today, Pass Perfect has to deal with, a varied set of scenarios, a varied set of the collections and their, and all the complications attached with it. So yeah, I mean, and again, we also because all of these have different budgets, and institutional budget will be very different from what a private collector can make available for the project and things like that. And that's when you can't have an archiving team with different functions and they can't work in silos.
Right.
That's when you have to structure teams, teams that can do take on multiple responsibilities, are at least sensitive towards the various forces. And that is what I think most of you are facing.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the collection, the budget, the purpose with what you're doing. So all this becomes very important when you're starting out any kind of project, which is why.
Right. And I think the flip side of the coin would be that the whole effort is usually for public access, whether controlled or curated or completely open access. And I think that
there
always brings up these questions,
will.
isn't it?
Yeah, I will disagree over there because we do enough and more projects where people are not doing this for public access. It is an ideal scenario, and we've learned to not insist, not not brainwash them into doing something like this, because we respect and understand the space from where they are coming. Very often what happens is this is something that I tell everybody who comes to us in the very first meeting and our pitch, is that there is a maturity cycle of the archive. What you start off with and what its potential is diametrically different, and it's okay for the archive to go about it slowly. You don't have to look at your collection on day one and say that इसको तो हम Cambridge University के साथ plug in करेंगे.
Right.
So calm down, understand where the collection has come, why it's come together, what are the various layers of your collection, and then decide, like Dipti was saying, what parts have a public facing potential, what parts are deeply private, deeply controversial. Controversial records is something we are constantly dealing with. Even if you look at, and I think Kaustub's project, for instance, you're dealing with dynamics within the family. You're recording it because right now it's you drawing conclusions from various conversations and your insights and things like that. If it goes out into the public, is it fair to the people, to the family, to the members involved? That's a responsibility that lies now in you. Think about it carefully. Right? There are lives of other people that are involved. So which is what I'm saying. I mean, not everything is great. If it is, because yes, I get democratization of information, open access, but come on, the world's not that mature to to deal with that kind of sort of openness. And our custodians are also not that mature. So you have to handhold them, show them. It has to be more demonstrative.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad that we clarified that bit as well. That you could start projects for internal referencing or for the personal need to get a closure, if I might call it so, in some cases, and then see how it grows and evolves to become more accessible. True. Over to you, Deepti. I was just warming us up back into the conversation.
Yeah, I think what I'll do now is I'll sort of to answer Aparna's question, also sort of show catalogs, etc. Let me just go back to sharing screen. Before I think I show catalogs, I just wanted them to understand, I think, the bit that we were talking about. Yeah, being able to access a collection in various ways. So I think I'm just going to Yeah. So the category conundrum, I think, and that's where I was talking, what I was talking about in terms of finding aids. I think attaching finding aids to your collection. What a lot of times I think we do, I mean, our filters evolve, and I'll give you exactly the examples that you see on screen. When we were setting up the Bajaj Family Archive, for example, what we did include is, because the collection was going to be accessed, it was a family archive, it was going to be accessed via personalities, right? Personalities within the family. So we added something called the personality category. Something that we realized eventually was that there are records that deal with multiple personalities. And then we figured, how do we organize it further? So that evolved into something that we said, okay, should we do a primary personality, secondary personality, and sort of, so that we are getting the record when we need it, when we are running a search accordingly. Similarly, we sort of did that when we were doing the Kirloskar archive, which was a business and a family archive. There we had to attach filters that could do business, family, and then within business, the companies. And I'll show you that in the catalog, etc. Something that we've also realized is when you attach a period, right? I think, and that's Sangamitra briefly sort of touched upon. You are, say, putting a DDMMYYY format date. You are saying 20th May 1995 as your date. When you need to retrieve this record, you are going to think about, okay, I want a record from the 90s. So something that we introduced eventually was to add a column called the decade marker, where we put 1990s and then we put the exact date. So these are things that will evolve. And I think that's something that you should constantly be experimenting with as well at your end, as to how you retrieving or trying to retrieve the collection. Yeah. Aparna, so I'm going to, I think for your reference, show a catalog that we had created for someone's collections of engravings. But that's also, I mean, the format is sort of similar. We've done it for coins as well, but I think because I've not put it out, I wouldn't be able to pull it out. But it literally, your catalog will first look like this. It'll have a lot of, right. So I think right from the accession number, and then in a lot of collections, there is an old number as well, whether it is something that you have acquired, etc. There is an annotation at the bottom as well as at the back. Which is always good to record. It's always good to have everything on your Excel sheet. Then you have something like an artist, where you sort of put down for the engraving. We have sort of the artist who has made the engraving. We have the title of the engraving. We have the material and the technique, which is basically print or colored on paper, etc. We have the date. We have the year of purchase, because like I said, this is a collector's collection and you have he's acquired it. So the year of purchase for him, the provenance sort of place, the description of the engraving particularly, the inscription on the engraving, which also becomes extremely important. What kind of an engraving is it? And again, these categories we sort of came up with based on how we would like to showcase it on a website. What are the categories we are thinking of it from the point of view of a user landing and saying, I want to see a monument, I want to see a landscape of an engraving. So those particular filters were added. The price, etc., location. Remarks is, we always have an additional notes archivist remark column for anything else that an archivist would like to share about the item, whether it's physical or content wise. Condition, whether it's mounted or not. We do attach a low res image. Of course, sometimes this makes the Excel sheet really heavy, but it's something that is also helpful. So we do add it wherever we can, at least. And then we have a digital image number. Once you've digitized it, the digital image number, in a lot of cases, we also put the file paths. So in the case of coins, for example, we will have the ruler of the dynasty it belonged to, the ruler of the dynasty it belonged to, the mint, all of these. So based on the object in front of you, you will define the columns that talk about its sort of, I think, its existence as a whole. So I think, while you all have seen this now, I think could we sort of also segue into, say, your collections and perhaps trying to develop a little based on what you guys have and attach metadata to it, I think it'll help sort of build solutions for you guys also. So, okay, yeah. So this is something that we had developed for Kirloskar. Like you will see, I think the Excel sheet has multiple sort of pages below it, which define the record types. That's paper records, photographs, memorabilia, special media. Now, special media is something, that, for example, what we classify into special media is anything that cannot be accessed by opening the cupboard and taking it out. A spool tape, a cassette, etc. All of this requires is special media today and will require to be digitized in order to access it. So we do treat it differently and put that as a separate column. Yeah. So if I had to take you through
First things first, I don't know, Vicky, whether you address this, but why is the collection categorized like this? Why do we rely on type of media while organizing the material? You guys, when you're doing the research, collecting the material, you're probably in your head categorizing your material in a certain way, right? But in an archive, it becomes important to categorize material from the point of view of the media type, simply because your storage is dependent on that, right? You will put newspapers or oversized material in a cupboard that can that can take in oversized material. You will store them flat, avoid the creases. It will typically be a large drawer or the bottommost shelf in the cupboard. For negatives and anything that is analogish in terms of special media, you will need a space that is dry, right? It'll have to avoid sun exposure, light exposure, and things like that. So it becomes important from that point of view. Again, in institutions, when you have the luxury of an archive room, your storage will be designed that way, and therefore your material will be catalogued like that, or rather your material will be categorized like that. If it is one cupboard, then it's different. Then you can sort of still organize it slightly differently. Even then, adhere to storage material type. But for instance, what we've had to do in Bajaj is that we were told very categorically, like Dipti mentioned, it has to be done personality wise. So even within the personality subject bucket, we have organized things in terms of the type of media. Your, again, storage, conservation, digitization, and handling of the material will change from material to material, and therefore it's sort of done in this kind of a way.
Yeah. Right. So I was taking you all through the columns that we had assigned. So I think here it will be a good sort of study to also know that our columns do change as per the media type as well. So in photographs, you will have an additional column indicating whether it's black and white or color, etc. In paper records, of course, here, because Kirloskar was to become a CMS, we also sort of added columns that talk about its access type. Whether it's a request access, a view, etc. Material type is paper record, because we also have documents, newspapers in paper record. So we added a material type and then a material category that tells you whether it's a newspaper, whether it's an annual report, whether it is a file, whether it's an invitation card, because it's all paper records. So we have material type and material category. Then we have technical specifications, which in this case aren't many. Then what we did was we arrived at this segregation of, we have a primary theme, secondary theme, and a tertiary theme. Like I told you, we had Kirloskar Group, which is the business. Then the secondary theme would be the company name, whereas in the family, it would be the personality name. We also had a few other categories that we added. And the tertiary theme, now this is where we sort of really had to sit. And I think that's where the exercise of developing a glossary for your collection comes in, right? What are the, because the moment you can go into 120 categories, but putting 120 options into your tertiary theme does not help your filter. So it's best to sit and develop a glossary for your collection that you can then assign. So if I am saying joint venture, I can assign it to things like that. Birth centenary was a very prominent theme, so that did come up. So you sort of, as a in totality, view your collection and develop these categories that can help you sort of narrow down your search and retrieve it as easily as possible. So that, and then of course the basics of period, language, the physical description becomes supremely important in an object. In an object, we define, let me go to memorabilia, for example. Sorry. Yeah. So here we have the Padma Bhushan Award, we have textile, metal in. So here the media type became important because we have memorabilia, but within memorabilia we have ceramic, we have textile, we have metal, we have wood. All of these become very important when you look at it from the conservation point of view in the future, like I said. So we have rubber, paper, glass. So identifying the material becomes important. Then, like I said, we have the primary, secondary theme, language, and then we have physical description where we talk about literally a black and red rectangular metal slide with the with a case enabling it to move up and down, etc., etc. 4 wooden block with painted faces. You literally, because what happens is, why are you creating a catalog? You are creating a catalog so that you don't keep going back to your cupboard to open the physical item. It needs to tell you it's minimizing your touch with the original. You go to the original when you need to go to the original, because too much interference with the original item is not required. So your catalog should tell you everything about the item that can help you visualize, understand, and sort of, document. So, which is why the physical description is here. The content description, like I said, we'll always have. Keywords you will assign. Again, keyword, when you're developing keywords, a glossary is important. From the standardization point of view, from the point of view of limiting it, cross-reference, like I said, we did do a cross-referencing here. We have number of items in the case of memorabilia, etc. Again, becomes super important. Dimensions, the provenance. This is the immediate provenance. Then we have the physical location of the item. Any additional notes if we would have, a condition notes, and then we've gone on to backend, which is whether it is a priority for digitization or not, and digitization notes. So now I think if you all have gotten, so for photographs, for example, we will have a lot of others. So as and when we developed, our collection sort of, the media types were different. We did develop different columns that helped us retrieve them more easily. So yeah, I think you should go back to your collections.